Songbird Farm, and today we're going to do something a little bit different. I lost my grandmother about a couple months ago, and one of her very favorite things on this planet was lemon curd, and I have very good memories of her making it and keeping it in her fridge. And she was a beautiful oil painter, and she would get up in the middle of the night and paint in her studio, and she'd go in the kitchen and she would keep little pie crusts, and she would make herself a snack of lemon curd in the pie crust or eat it with vanilla wafers. So I noticed the other day that our grocery store had organic lemons on sale, and I thought, what a fun way to remember her and honor her is by making some lemon curd. And I can give you guys kind of an introduction to water bath canning. Later this summer, we're planning on showing people how to use a pressure canner. Low acid foods like green beans have to be pressure canned, and people are very afraid of that, but there's nothing to be afraid of. I promise you won't blow up your kitchen, and it'll be great. But water bath canning is a great way to start. So let's talk about kind of the equipment that we'll need. First of all, I highly recommend going to your local extension office. A lot of them have canning classes, and that's where I learned to can, was in an extension office. I did a class on water bath canning and on pressure canning, and it was just so nice to get your hands on and have somebody who had done it before there to teach you. Or find a friend like me or somebody you know and get them to show you how. One thing that is extremely important is that you always use a recipe that has been told by the USDA that it is safe and food safe, because they test the acids in all the recipes and make sure that that food is going to be safe for a long time on the shelf in your jar. So there's a lot of recipes out there online, a million recipes. Be very careful using ones that haven't been tested. So to that end, I have a few books that I love to use and a few resources that I love to use that I know are safe. So one of them is, when I very first started canning and actually took the class, they gave us all a copy of the Ball Blue Book Guide to Preserving. And this is just kind of the little, almost magazine type version. They have a big book, Ball does, that is fabulous with a million recipes in it. I know every one of these recipes has been tested and is extremely safe, so that is a good thing to use. I also like this book. It's called Keeping the Harvest, and it doesn't go over just canning. It also goes over drying and pickling and freezing. So it's kind of a nice way. You can look up whatever vegetable or fruit you have, and it'll give you some various ways to preserve that. And the other, actually what we're going to use for today's recipe is, if you do choose to use an online source, this recipe is from the National Center for Home Food Preservation. It's through the University of Georgia, and these have all been tested as well. So I know that this recipe is safe. So that's kind of my PSA, is when you do can, you want to make sure you're using a recipe that's been well tested and that you know is safe. I know that some of our grandmothers and great aunts and stuff like that canned potatoes in a water bath canner, but that has not been shown to be safe, so you have to use a pressure canner. So those are just some examples of, well, my mom / grandma / uncle / whoever did it this way, but that's not always safe. So I like to err on the side of caution and use a well-tested recipe. So there's that. We'll go over the equipment and stuff that we're going to use. So water bath canning, you really don't have to have super fancy equipment, to be honest. You just need your jars. Today we're using 1/2 pint mason jars. I got these on sale. I think at one of our local feed stores was having an end of the year sale toward Christmas, and so I picked up a bunch of boxes of new jars. So here's our 1/2 pint jars. They already come with the lids and rings. If you're given jars, that's great. Just make sure you run your finger around the rim and test for any chips or cracks. And then you can buy rings and lids separately. So old jars are great. Just make sure they don't have any defects, and you can use those. The other thing you need for water bath canning is, of course, a water bath canner. Some people just use a really big pot, and that's okay too, but what we want is a big kettle type equipment that we can submerge the jars in, because your goal is to have at least 1 inch of water above the head of your closed jars. And then this is a fabulous item. And if you buy a water bath canner, they're only about $30. They're really not too bad. And almost all of them will come with a jar rack. It keeps the jars up off the bottom of the canner. And then it also will lift your jars out so that you can grab them with your jar lifter. So at the very least, you're going to need your canner, your jars, And then this is invaluable, it is the jar lifter, because you have to have a way to get those scalding hot jars out of your canner. So that is very, very important to have. There's some other things that are nice to have, and I had them when I started out. There is a little kit you can buy, and it has a lot of different equipment in it. It's got a plastic funnel. I have a stainless steel funnel that I use now, but it's to funnel your liquids into the jars, or your food into the jars. And they also include a little spatula type device that you can measure your headspace with and also get the air bubbles out. And those kits are super inexpensive, and you can get them all the major retailers like Walmart and Rural King and that kind of place. So those are fabulous to start with if you're just starting canning. Usually you'll need some kind of strainer or colander, but that's something you'll already have in your kitchen. For today's recipe with the lemon curd, we're going to be zesting the lemons. So we have our zester. I also highly recommend using plastic utensils when you're dealing with your jars, because if you use metal ones, they can cause little micro fractures in your jar, which over time, when you use them in your canner, that can cause them to shatter. So if you use plastic utensils or silicone utensils, you'll be in much better shape. So I've got a spatula, a spoon. The other thing that will be a little bit different with this recipe as opposed to just a jelly or jam recipe that you put in the jar and put in the canner and you're done. This is going to require us to measure the temperature on our mixture to get it to the appropriate amount before we put it in the jar. So I just have a little digital thermometer that I'm going to check that with. We also have a strainer because this is a curd. So I'm going to strain it through here before I jar it to make sure that there's no pieces of scrambled egg in there or anything that is not going to go through. I've got a couple of different size bowls that we're going to use. I'm going to use one of these as kind of a double boiler, and you'll see that when we get over to the stove. Of course, I have my lemons. I have butter. It's unsalted. We're going to need several eggs, and the other thing that the recipe calls for is super fine sugar, which is kind of difficult to find around here usually. My local Kroger, for example, has it, but it's in a very small amount. So the easiest thing to do is use your regular sugar and just run it through your food processor for about 1 minute, and you have super fine sugar. So we'll be doing that. And we will get everything together and we'll get started. So we'll see you in just a second. Okay, so as you can see, I have put on an apron, I've got my hair up, my hands are clean and washed because you want to be as clean as possible when you're talking about something you're going to keep for a long time. It's also just very good practice to wash your hands. A couple of things I'm going to mention to you. So in water bath canning, you know, it used to be that we always sterilized our jars. Well, the latest research shows that unless your recipe calls for being water bath canned for less than 10 minutes, you don't have to sterilize your jars. So right now I have my jars in a sink of hot soapy water. I'm just going to clean them real good. It's also a fabulous idea to use your dishwasher, especially if it has a sanitized setting, because it'll heat those jars and you can literally just leave them hot in your dishwasher until you're ready to can, which is kind of kills two birds with one stone. So what I'll be doing is I'm going to wash them real good with this hot soapy water, and then I'm going to go ahead and put them in my water bath canner so they can be hot while I prepare our curd. Also about water bath canning is you want to make sure that you don't bring your water to a boil quite yet. We want to get it to about 180 degrees and have it sitting there waiting for our jars. Then we'll put our lid on, bring it up to a hot boil, and that's when we'll start the processing time. So right now I'm going to go ahead and get our sugar ready to go. So as I said earlier, it's kind of hard to find super fine sugar. If you can, great, get it. It'll just save you a step. But this is just regular old all-purpose granulated sugar. And I'm just going to give it a whiz in my food processor, and it'll just grind it up a little bit finer and give us some fine whiz. So I'm going to turn it on high and just let it go for a second. I've already done this for a minute, so I'm not going to do it the whole time. At the end, I like to give it a little bit of a pulse and make sure there's nothing else that we need to get in there. So I'm going to go ahead and move on over to our lemon zest. Okay, so we are ready to zest our lemons. If you don't know what zesting a lemon is, it's really kind of a fancy word for you just only want this yellow part of the lemon. I'm going to try really hard not to get into the white, which is called the pith, because that's where you get your bitterness. The outside is where you get all those lemon oils, and it just, the taste and the flavor is amazing. So that's what we're gonna do. I have my sugar sitting over here aside. When I get my half a cup of lemon zest, I'm going to put it in the sugar and set it aside for about 30 minutes, and we'll come back. In the meantime, I'm gonna go ahead and get my butter ready to go. It's very cold, it's been in the freezer actually. I'm also gonna separate my eggs. These are our Southern Songbird eggs that have already been processed. You can use them straight out of your coop if you want. We process them for selling. So I've got my eggs. I'm gonna need 11 of those. I'm gonna have 7 egg yolks and 4 whole eggs. So it's a great thing to do in the spring when your chickens are laying like crazy and you've got too many eggs. This is a great way to use them. So we're gonna do our eggs. The other thing I neglected to say earlier is when you are trying to do canning recipes, you wanna make sure that you're using the ingredients it calls for. So I am not going to use the juice from these lemons that I bought. And the reason is I don't want to use an acidity that I'm not sure exactly what it is. If I wanted to be really fancy, I could test the acidity myself with pH paper. I think it has to be at least 4.6% acidity, but I'm going to do that because what I can do for my lemon juice portion is just buy bottled lemon juice. And that's the safest thing to do. But don't worry, I'm not gonna waste this delicious fresh juice. I'm going to save it and I'm gonna love it in my tea for the next few days, so I'm gonna juice my lemons as well. So we'll go ahead and get started zesting. So I've got my micro planer here, and all I'm gonna do is just real gently scrape this lemon across it. So as you can see, I'm not getting down into the white at all. You're still seeing yellow, and when I start to see white, I wanna make sure that I'm stopped. And I'm gonna collect it all right here in this little bowl, and then I'll measure it out. So as you can see, that yellow's starting to disappear. That's what I'm looking for. And if you don't have a fancy zester or planer, don't worry. You can also use a real fine grater, and that'll do the job as well. Trying to use every part of that lemon. As you can see, you need quite a bit of lemons for the zest, so you'll have lots of delicious juice left over to make lemonade or enjoy in your tea. Okay, so this is a lemon I just completely did. There's a little bit more I could probably get off there in a couple of places. I'm gonna kind of clean that up a little bit. What I'm trying to avoid, like I said, is getting down into that white part, that's the pith, because it's gonna just start getting extra bitter, so we don't wanna do that. Here is a whole lemon, so you can kind of get in there close and see. I'm just barely scraping that lemon over this grater, and it's leaving that little path right there. So I just kind of rotate the lemon in my hand and move it all over the little planer. And it's collecting down here. It kind of collects in this back part. You can slide it down. Just be careful with your fingers. And I'm just collecting it in this bowl, and I'm looking to get about half a cup. So I'm just gonna keep on going and get all these lemons zested. Probably gonna take me about 3 or 4 lemons to get what I need. Okay, so now we have our lemon zest. We have added it to our superfine sugar, and it's been sitting for a little while, so that's incorporating. I also want to tell you that when I did the food processor with the granulated sugar, that I put about 3 cups of sugar in the food processor. That way, when I measured out, I would know that I'd have 2.5 of the superfine sugar. So throw you a little extra in there so that you can measure it after you food process it. So now we've got to divide our eggs. This recipe calls for 2.5 cups of superfine sugar, 1 cup of bottled lemon juice, which I have right here. It calls for 3/4 cup of butter, which is a stick and a half, which we'll be cutting into little pieces momentarily. Calls for 1/2 cup of lemon zest, which for me and those size lemons ended up being about 3 lemons. And it also calls for 7 egg yolks and 4 whole eggs. So we're gonna get started separating some eggs. I'm gonna separate them over some bowls, and then I'm gonna add them to what I'm gonna use as a double boiler. We are going to be heating this over the stove. We're gonna heat it to 170 degrees prior to filling our jars. I've gone ahead and washed all my jars in the sink with hot soapy water. Again, we don't have to sterilize them because our recipe time is going to be 15 minutes of processing. So it's not under 10, so I don't have to sterilize, but I do want to make sure I wash with hot soapy water. And those are now waiting for us over there in the water bath canner, staying nice and hot. So as I do that, I'm also going to point out to you that we're going to have some 7 egg whites left over. So this is a great opportunity to make yourself a delicious meringue pie of some kind. Maybe a chocolate pie with a meringue or coconut cream pie, whatever you maybe have at your house. So we're just separating our eggs. I use the shells. There's fancy egg separators if you want to do that. We're not making anything fancy like a souffle, so it's okay if they're not perfect. This is a good opportunity to kind of talk about our eggs a little bit. It'll kind of tie into our other video, and I'll put a link up here to in the cue card about our video that I do called A Yolk of a Different Color. Talks a little bit about why certain eggs are certain colors and why some aren't. So that's 3 yolks. So here is, for example, a brown egg. And as you can see, the inside is white. It's a white shell because this brown color gets put on as the hen is laying the egg in the very last stage before it comes out. This blue egg that I cracked, kind of a blue-green egg, if you can kind of tell in the light, you may be not able to, but it's blue inside as well. It's different than this. It's not white like this. So this blue color gets put on way before this brown color does. The brown gets put on right at the very, very end, and this blue color actually is the whole shell. So that's kind of cool. While we have the different eggs here for us to see. And we're just going to keep on separating. As you might be able to tell, these egg yolks are just a tiny bit, they're probably not as pale as the ones that are caged eggs at the grocery store, but they're a little bit paler than they will be here in even just a few weeks. That's because our pastured chickens are still in their winter pasture, and so there is not a nary a grass blade left, and we are actually getting ready to next week move them out on bright green pasture, and you will see these yolks turn super yellow. Number 6. Number 7. And I'm going to set these egg whites aside because I want to make sure I do something yummy with those later. You could make an egg white omelet. You could make you a meringue pie. And now we're going to do 4 whole eggs. These aside. I'm putting these egg shells back in this carton. I have 1 egg left, but we are not allowed to reuse egg cartons in the state of Kentucky, so we just recycle that, which is great. And let me find my whisk. Oh, it's right here behind me. And we're just going to whisk all this up. We're going to whisk now, then we'll incorporate all these ingredients once we get over to the double boiler. So I don't have a double boiler. I don't particularly need a double boiler to take up space in my kitchen and my pantry because this bowl happens to fit very nicely over one of my pots. So I can just put a couple inches of water in the bottom of that, get it boiling, and then I can put my whatever I'm cooking or melting on top of it. And it's kind of a fake double boiler. So I've got these eggs nice and whisked up. I'm gonna cut up my butter into little pieces, and we'll meet over at the stove and get this stuff incorporated. Okay, so I have whisked with my big whisk the sugar zest mixture into the eggs. Then I poured in my 1 cup of lemon juice, and you can see I had cut all that butter up into little pieces, and I have it on here now. And now I'm going to set it on top of my double boiler here, which, like I said, is not a real double boiler. Now, I'm going to switch to a spatula for this because I've already got a little bit of air incorporated into this thanks to the whisking of the eggs. So what I don't want to do is get any more air in here. And what I'm going to do is just continue to stir this gently so it doesn't stick to the bottom of the bowl. Got my towel here because it's going to start getting hot so I can hold it. And what I'm going to do is just melt all this butter, and I'm going to continuously move this mixture. And here in a little while, I'm going to get my trusty thermometer and check my temp, and what I'm looking for is 170 degrees Fahrenheit. So we're going to stir away. Done. You can get a little close up here if you want of the melting. All right, so we have been stirring. We started at 5:26. It is now 5:54. So we've stirred for roughly almost 30 minutes, not quite. As you can see, it has gotten a little bit thicker. You can want to come in here, Doug. It's a little bit thicker. So what I'm going to do now, I've just been constantly kind of cleaning off these sides and the bottom as I stir. And really, I've had very little scrambling or anything of that nature. So I'm going to set a timer for 5 minutes. I'm going to take this with my handy dandy thing, because this is on a hot pot. Take this over here. Turn that burner off to my double boiler. Move that out of the way. And just double check the temperature over here on my thing. It's right at 180 where I want it to be. So I'm going to get ready to use those. And I'm going to stir this for these 5 minutes. And it's already thickening here in the bowl before I even got it off the heat. But I'm just looking for it to thicken a little bit more. So when the timer hits 5 minutes, I'm going to get my jars out of the water. You just empty them out. I'll show you how to do that. And we will funnel in our delicious curd. We're going to leave a 1/2 inch headspace. And I'll show you what that looks like as well. Usually your jams and jellies are a 1/4 inch or an 1/8 inch headspace. Your things that are a little bit thicker like this are typically a 1/2 inch headspace. And things that are low acid foods, meats, green beans, things like that, you're looking at more like an inch of headspace. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we fill these jars up. So I'm just going to continue to stir here. I'm going to wait for my timer to go off, and then we'll be ready to load into the jars. All right, I've been stirring the curd for 5 minutes. My timer just went off. It's thickened up even a little bit more. And now I'm going to work it through this strainer. And what that's going to do is catch any little pieces of scrambled egg that might have gotten scrambled when it was on the side of double boiler, although I kept it moving really well, so I think I shouldn't have any of that issue. So we're just going to pour this into here. I didn't say this was a recipe that didn't use very many dishes. We're going to set that right here. Take off this so I can function. And we're just going to work this through the strainer. It's going to get rid of any curds or clumps of egg that may have been in here. And we'll just work this through, and we'll be ready to jar this. So I'm just passing my spatula over and over the bottom of the strainer, letting all of that work in. It looks like this was a very smooth curd, but already I can see in the strainer that it is catching a couple little pieces of scrambled egg, if you want to call it that. So that's why we take the time to do this and work it through. Little pieces of zest that are maybe a little bit too big, some pith that might have snuck in while we were planing it. So I'm just going to continue to work this through, and in just a minute we'll be ready to fill the jars. so it looks like we're about there. All that's left in here, if you can see, is kind of on the thick side, so it's not going to go through the strainer, which is perfectly fine. So I'm going to clean my spatula off. Now this is good stuff right here, so I'm going to make sure I scrape all that off. And this is still pretty warm, so be careful. Scrape this off, saving my spatula. Just going to set this aside. Now I'm ready to jar. So I'm going to set this right here. Double checking the temperature on my water again. We're good to go. So what I'm going to do is take my jars out, use your jar lifter, and be very careful with this. But what I'm going to do is just tilt the jars and empty them out from the water. I want to get all that water out of there, and just be very careful with that. There's a jar. I'm going to get 4 out. I probably won't need 4. The recipe should always give you the yield. Your canning recipe should always give your yield. This says it yields 3 to 4 half pints, which is what these are. I doubt I'll fill all 4. And if there is ever, when you're making jam or curd or anything like this, and you ever have a little bit extra, I call that your snack size. And you can put that straight in your fridge and just eat it over the course of a week. So I'll probably end up with a snack size. I'll have to go get some Nilla wafers like my grandmother and just eat it right out of the refrigerator. It'll be delicious. So I'm just getting all of that hot water out of there. And we're going to set them here. And then I'm going to fill. So I've got my funnel. I'm going to put it in the jar. Again, this bowl's warm, so just be aware of that. And I'm going to very carefully pour it into the jar. And what I'm looking for is that 1/2 inch headspace. So I'll show you what that looks like. Set your funnel into the next jar. So I'm going to just, now it's hot, so just be aware of that. I'm just going to knock it on the table a little bit. And that 1/2 inch ought to be just right under that rim on the jar. So that is about exactly right. And I've filled it up enough to kind of know, do not panic if you get too much. All you have to do is just get a spoon and spoon a little bit out, or always you can spoon a little more in. So that's perfectly fine. So I'm going to set that aside. Again, just be careful if it's hot, if you're sensitive to hot temperatures, just be very careful with that. Next jar. My next one. Gonna push it down just a little bit. I can see I've got some air bubbles in here. So I'm going to show you what I do with that. I'm going to take any kind of plastic appliance, actually a plastic knife from like a picnic or whatever is totally fine. And what you do is you just run down a jar, just right inside the jar. Again, we want to use plastic or nylon because we don't want to use metal utensils in our jar. It can lead to cracking. And what I'm doing is I'm just running that down on the inside of the jar like this. And that's going to keep me from having any kind of air bubble in there that would keep you from winning the blue ribbon at the fair. All right, so I've just run that through there. That looks good. I need just a teeny tiny bit more to get to my 1/2 inch headspace now that I've taken the air out. I'm going to use my spatula to get me just a little bit more in there. Looks much better. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to get a wet paper towel. The last step before you put the lid on is you want to wipe off the rim of your jar. The reason we do that is because in order for this jar to seal properly, it can't have any food residue, sugars, or anything like that on it. So I'm going to be very careful to wipe this rim. Again, if the heat bothers you, wear a glove. I'm going to wipe that off. I'm going to get my lid. Let me have a moment to talk about the lids. Ball jars, you used to have to keep your lids in a little saucepan of water that was hot and keep them warm. Fall has now said that you no longer have to warm your lids. Now these are pretty warm. I just got them out of warm water, so they're still a little bit warm, but you don't have to do that step anymore. They don't have to be kept in a hot water thing like your jar. So I just want to put that out there. But you should always check the manufacturer label on whatever lid you're using or jar you're using. That way you'll know for sure. So I'm just going to set it on top there, and I'm going to put my lid on, and all I want to do is tighten it just to finger tight. I'm not cranking down on that lid. I'm only going to do it finger tight, because once this seals in our water bath canner, I'm actually going to remove the ring, which will keep rust from forming. And that seal is as sealed as a can that comes out of your cabinet from the grocery store. So this way I know that I don't have the any rust forming under this ring, and it also lets me know that I got a great seal, because I can actually pick that jar up once it's sealed from the lid. So for those of you that love lemon curd and you don't want to have to go through this canning, as soon as you get it thickened to what you need, you can also put this into freezer containers. Again, leave a little bit of headspace for yourself, and it'll freeze up to a year. Or you can do like me and stick it in a jar, put it in your fridge, and eat on it until it's gone. I wouldn't keep it in the fridge more than about a week, but you can certainly do that as well. I'm going to finish putting these jars together, and now I'll meet you back at the canner. All right, we've got them all jarred up, ready to go. I also neglected to say that if you do not want to destine your delicious curd for the freezer or the fridge, you can also use those egg whites you just separated out, make yourself a gorgeous meringue, and make you a lemon meringue pie. Just a serving suggestion. But these are destined for the canner, so in they go. I'm going to put them all in here. I like to just kind of space them out. I've got enough water in here. It comes about an inch or two over the top of the jars. You can get a little closer, Doug, if you can. I don't know. I don't want to fog up the lens, but put those in there with our jar lifter. I've just kind of got them spaced out a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the lid on there, and it was right at 180, which is where it's supposed to be. So I'm going to go ahead and crank up the heat. I'm going to turn it to high, and what I'm going to do is listen for this to come to a rolling boil. You're going to hear a little bit of a rattle. The other thing that I was taught by the ladies at the extension office where I took my class is you can take your gloved hand and lay it on the side, and you'll feel a rumble when it comes to that full boil. What you want to try to avoid, if you can, is peeking under your lid to see if it's on a full boil, because this lid is helping us get that boil quicker. So once we are to our full boil, and you can kind of check it and see if you're at a full boil, that is when the processing time starts. So 15 minutes does not start now. It's going to start when we get to that full boil. So we're going to check it, and we're going to put our timer on, and then I'll show you when we get them out of the canner. All right, my timer is about to go off in about 50 seconds. And I just wanted to take a minute to talk about the stove on which you can. This is just a traditional stove. We have our little country stove that you may have seen in the back over there. This has just got traditional burners. I have canned on a flat top, glass top stove before, and did for years. Now, that voided the warranty of that particular stove, so just be very cognizant. You might want to check your user manual and see. If it's peak canning season and you're really doing lots of loads, you might even want to do it outside in the summertime. Get a little propane burner and do it that way. It's a great idea. So just make sure you check with your stove and your user manual before you put a big canner on this, because this canner is absolutely super heavy. So here's the timer going off. Take this off. The other thing I did as well is once this came to the full boil, I turned this heat down a little bit off high, because I just need to keep a rolling boil. And if you leave it on high the whole time, what happens is you get a ton of boil over and you've got a huge mess on your stove. So be very, very careful as you take the lid off. There's lots of steam. I'm going to turn the burner off. I'm not going to now because of the position of the camera and stuff, but if you feel comfortable doing it and you are strong enough to do it and you have enough strength to get it over, sometimes I will move this off the burner when I do this, but I'm not going to right now. So all I'm going to do is reach in and get my little, I'm barely tipping that off the lid. We may hear a pop once these cool. You know they are sealed when you hear a little ting as the lid sucks down and seals onto the jar. Just gentle tip just to get that water off the lid. I have one more. You get a free facial when you do this. And I was trying to see if every once in a while, it's much more obvious when you have a little bit of a thinner solution, especially if you're doing vegetables. It's very common for these just to be bubble, 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 bubble as they're coming out. That's totally okay. They will, their pressure inside and their temperature is very, very boiling, and just like the water came out of. So that's very common for these to be bubbling when you get them out. So we're just going to listen for the ping. And what I'm going to do is move these over to a spot where you don't have to touch them for 12 to 24 hours. And after 24 hours, you can check to make sure they're sealed. If they're not sealed, you can stick them in your fridge like we talked about before and just use them up within about a week. And you can use them that way, but otherwise they should be sealed. And this lemon curd recipe is good on the shelf for about 3 to 4 months. After that, it's not that it's necessarily unsafe to eat, it's just you're probably going to have some discoloration and stuff of that nature. So it's going to be much fresher and of better quality if you use it up within the first 3 to 4 months. But when you taste it, you're going to be using it up, trust me. I've got another batch to go in, although I am debating that lemon meringue pie, so I'm going to start on that. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that my mom all up above enjoyed it too. This is for her, so we appreciate it. Please follow us on Instagram and Facebook. We really try to keep people up to date on what's going on the farm and what products we have available. Absolutely give us a follow here on YouTube, because we want to, and please comment. We want to do what you want to see. So if there's something you want to see or you're curious about what we do here, please let us know, and we will love to hear from you. So I'll put our website down in the comments. I'll put a link to this recipe from the University of Georgia, and just hope that we see you soon, and we appreciate you watching. Thanks so much.